Hello, it's Martin. I've already covered the Porsche Macan configurator on this channel and the video was quite well received because quite a few of you guys have found it useful when configuring your Porsches. So in today's one we will be looking at the Taycan in the same light. However, despite both of them being electric Porsches, they are different vehicles in the end, so even though the options can be quite similar, if you want to get the most out of the Taycan, there are different ones you have to pick compared to the Macan. With having all of that said, why should you listen to me? Well, if you're new to the channel, I work for a used electric car dealer here in London and we do stock quite a few Taycans, so we would like to think we kind of know the market, we know what people are looking for and what are the absolute must-haves to enhance your electric Porsche experience. Now, the aforementioned Macan video was about 45 minutes long and I'm afraid this one will be probably even longer because there are more Taycan derivatives, so I will make sure to include chapters in the video description which will split the timeline along the bottom of the screen into sections, so you can just jump to the ones which you find the most interesting or confusing. But without further talking, let's actually look at the Porsche website now. There are three body styles of the Taycan to choose from. The original one launched as the Sport Saloon, so a traditional four-door car with a three-box shape, meaning you get a standard saloon boot. If you want, it looks fantastic, but it can be a little bit compromising in terms of boot space. So if you want more practicality, you can jump into the Sport Turismo, which basically is the same car, it just has a bigger hatchback. I wouldn't really call it a wagon or an estate, it's more of a shooting brake, but you definitely get that bigger boot opening, so if you for example want to carry mountain bikes once in a while in the boot, it will be a lot more usable. And lastly, we've got the Cross Turismo, which is very similar to the Sport Turismo in terms of the overall body shape, but you get more ground clearance by default, and if you look very closely, you will see that you also get some additional matte plastic cladding around the wheel arches and in fact all around the perimeter of the car to make it look a bit more off-roady. So imagine this almost like Audi does the all-road versions of their A4 and A6 estates. This is that kind of thing, and it's quite a popular option because it bridges the gap between SUVs and crossovers and the more elegant but less practical sports saloons. For the purposes of this video, let's start with the configuration of the sports saloon, and in fact I will go in and I will try to make this a sensible configuration. Obviously with Porsches and many of these other German brands, it's very easy to get very trigger happy and tick all the boxes, which sends the price through the roof, but I will try to be sensible to show you what are the options worth going for if you want maximum value for money. On top of the different body styles, you also get different drivetrains, and not all of them are available with all the body styles. I will try to put up on the screen the matrix now so you can see what roughly is available, but as the baseline you get a Taycan with a single motor on the rear axle, and if you want to pay more you can get a bigger battery or an all-wheel drive system thanks to a second motor powering the front axle. And that's in fact what I will pick, the Taycan 4S. It brings the all-wheel drive system thanks to the dual motor drivetrain and also a little bit more performance without going completely crazy like the Turbo or Turbo S for example. With the facelift, this being filmed in the August of 2024, Porsche increased the prices of the Taycan, and as you can see the 4S now starts at almost £96,000 here in the UK, which is definitely quite punchy, but I'm afraid it is what it is. I will discuss some alternatives to the Taycan later on in the video. Anyways, now that we are in the configurator, we start with the exterior and there's plenty of choice of colors. As standard, you can choose between solid white or solid black. Both not exactly very exciting, and being solid they can be quite difficult to maintain because they will show every speck of dirt and a scratch, especially on the black version. So what I would recommend is going for one of the metallic options. I personally quite like the Dolomite Silver. It's not too expensive at £900 and it really makes it look that much better. Plus, from a practicality point of view and us having prepared many cars like this at Wisely, the silver is very good at hiding any imperfections. If you want something a bit more special and not as bland, you can go for one of the dream options, but then the price starts increasing quite quickly. The dark blue is also particularly nice, or the purple Provence, but this is very much up to your personal taste. But I will stick with the Dolomite Silver for now, because remember, we are trying to be sensible and budget conscious. If you get completely carried away, you can also obviously opt into the Paint to Sample program, where you can choose any color you wish. But yeah, that starts costing a pretty penny. As we move on to the wheels, it's a good point to mention that some of the standard specification changes with the trim level. So you get a bit more bundled in with, for example, the Turbo and the Turbo S. And even in case of the 4S, for example, you get the diamond cut two-tone wheels as standard, whereas normally the base level Taycan would come on these plain looking 19-inch alloys. They are the same shape as the standard ones on the 4S, just a different finish. I personally quite like the 20-inch Aero wheels. There's also a similarly priced new design specifically for the facelift, and they are both a very good balanced option, both in terms of price point and how much range you will get. Because particularly with electric cars, you have to be quite careful about wheels. Both the alloy size, in other words, the weight of the alloy, the aerodynamic profile, so how flat they look from the face, and how wide they are and how wide of a tire they need will impact the efficiencies. So it can be very tempting to go for one of these 21-inch open options, which nicely show off the brakes, but they will really take a quite significant hit on range. A pro tip is that you can go into the info section and then you can get the exact dimensions of the actual alloys. So you can see in the case of the RS Spider design wheels, the ones on the rear axle are 11.5 inches wide, whereas the Aero ones are half an inch narrower. Moving on, you can also get different kind of more custom or exclusive finishes for the wheels, different accessories and so on, but nothing which would be really necessary, especially here in the UK market, where we basically are on summer tires all the time. So let me just continue right onto the interior. As standard, you get a partial leather interior, which means that some sections are real leather, whereas some are kind of fake vegan leather. It all looks quite smart, and you have to keep in mind it's still designed to a Porsche standard, so I would say you can quite happily stick with that. You will not be disappointed, and free of charge you can choose different colors. So if you want, for example, something a little bit more exciting, the chalk beige is quite a nice option. And being chalk, it's more of an ivory color rather than your old school beige, so it looks quite modern and fits the Taycan quite well. But me having selected the bright exterior, I will just stick with the boring black interior. Let me take a moment to explain some of the Porsche lingo, because it can get quite confusing with the different interior material choices. Racetex is basically Porsche's name for Alcantara, or in other words, a synthetic man-made material which resembles suede leather. It's very premium, but you have to keep in mind the reason why manufacturers love putting Alcantara everywhere, because it's quite cheap to manufacture, but it doesn't detract from the fact that it looks quite lovely. In case of the leather-free interior, the seating surface is a patterned cloth, and you've got this kind of Alcantara microfiber finish on the outside. And to truly be 100% leather-free and vegan, even though I am fairly sure not many Taycan owners are going to go for this option, because you're essentially paying extra for a fancy cloth interior, you get the Racetex or Alcantara steering wheel. We will discuss why that's not exactly the best idea in a second. If you want to go for full leather, which I understand will be quite a popular option for many Taycan owners, you can go for the different finishes, and you also get some additional colors compared to the standard trims, but it's quite a pricey option at almost £3,000. And if you want to go for the two-tone with the beige, for example, we are over the £3,000 mark. So as I said, I'm sticking with the standard partial black leather interior. And similarly to the paint, if you want higher quality leather, you can pay even more for it. And maybe it's because I am one of those crazy vegans, but I don't quite see how you will actually recoup the value for money in slightly nicer leather. What I would say is quite important are the seats. As standard, you get the comfort seats, which are 8-way adjustable and fully electrically adjustable, which sounds pretty decent, but when you actually think about how Porsche counts 8-way adjustment, it's very basic. You can move the seat forward, backward, you can adjust the pitch of the seat base and the backrest, and that's it. You've got no lumbar support, no adjustable under thigh support, and no seat memory. So at the very least, I would recommend going for the upgraded comfort seats with the 14-way adjustment and included memory package, because at that point As the name says, you get the actual memory package, but also more adjustment with electrically adjustable lumbar support pillow and the adjustable length of the seat base. However, if the budget allows, the sports seats are a fantastic choice. Counterintuitively, even though they are named sports seats, they are still fairly comfortable, and they feature the most adjustment with the ability to also inflate or deflate the side bolsters. So if you're, for example, a little bit larger or you want to be extra comfortable on a long road trip, you can make the seat a little bit wider. But the moment you get onto some nice twisty roads and you start driving dynamically and you want to be hugged in the seat, then you can make the seat a little bit more supportive. And both of these seat upgrades also automatically bring in the electric adjustment of the steering column and the position memory package. So unlike just the surfacing, I think if you're planning to spend a lot of time in the Taycan, this is a crucial option to pick. It's up to you to really decide whether you want the comfort or you prefer the additional adjustment of the sports seats. Also super important is the 4+1 seat option, because as standard, all body styles of the Taycan are strict 4-seaters, and even calling it the 4-seater is a bit of a stretch because the rear room is quite limited, so it's more of a 2+2, but obviously having the 5th seat, it will not be super comfortable, it's quite narrow, but at least in a pinch, if you're driving your 4 friends to the pub, the actual last person has somewhere to sit, because otherwise there's actually no middle seat in the back with no seatbelt receiver and just a little storage area. Front heated seats are now standard, but if you want the option, you can have rear heated seats as well, and also front seat ventilation. The front seat ventilation is a nice feature, but it's about £800 and you can definitely get away with it, especially in the UK climate. If you want the ultimate luxury, you can go for the massaging seats, but this package is only compatible with the comfort seats. So if you want the sports seats, I'm afraid no massage for you. However, for my sensible configuration, I'm leaving all of that out. A word of warning is if you want to really stretch out maximum range from your Taycan and you live in a colder climate, the seat heating for rear passengers as well is quite a neat option, because as you probably know, heating in an electric car does take a toll on the range, but using your steering wheel heater and your seat heaters basically doesn't impact the range at all. All of those devices are powered from the 12-volt network, so it's very similar to having your radio or lights on. It's a very small energy consumer and it's heating you directly, reducing how much energy you need to heat the cabin air. So if you're worried about wind range, it's definitely an option to take. Going back to the exterior, you can choose different exterior packages with basically the sport package, adding lots of body colored pieces all around the perimeter of the vehicle, including the front bumper, the side skirts and on the rear. Personally, I don't think it's really needed, especially at £2,000. You can also go for it in gloss black if you prefer a bit of contrast or a more of a stealth look, or lastly even in carbon for almost £5,000. Not what I would spend my money on, but you do you. Importantly, you don't have to commit all the way, because if you just, for example, want the side skirts, you can just pick that individual option in the exterior section of the configurator. Likewise, you have got the same option for the front, the wing mirrors, etc. But I'm happy with how the car looks as it is. The only thing I want, again, to create a little bit of a contrast with the bright exterior, are the gloss black window surrounds, and that's it. There's no need to mess with it too much. You can also choose what kind of badging or stickers you want on the side of the vehicle. These are generally not that expensive, but I just like to leave it simple. You can also completely remove the model designation if you want to go full on minimalist. The important section is the powertrain and chassis section, because this really is, I'm afraid, where you need to spend some money. Firstly, Performance Battery Plus, almost £4,500, but yes, worth it. Especially on a car of this class like the Taycan, you want good range. It's going to be a GT car, it's a cruiser. If you only use it mainly in the city as a tax efficient way of getting a luxurious premium vehicle, then fair enough, you can get away without it. And now with the facelift, the battery sizes have been increased compared to the outgoing car, so even the base one is usable, but I would say the Performance Battery Plus is definitely a must-have, because then you will realistically get 300 miles of range comfortably even at motorway speeds. Next option is the rear axle steering, and if you watched and remember from the Macan video, in there I said it's not really necessary. Well, the Taycan is a little bit different. It's a longer vehicle, which makes it a little bit more tricky to maneuver, especially around tight city streets. So, for both that convenience standpoint and also for the better handling and dynamics, and this car being even more focused on sportiness than the SUV Macan, I would say at 1.6 thousand pounds, at already this basically 100 grand price point, it makes sense to tick. If you're not aware how it works, basically there's an actuator on the rear axle, and at low speeds, when you turn the steering wheel, the rear wheels turn opposite to the front ones to reduce the turning radius. However, at high speeds, to aid with stability, the rear wheels turn the same way as the front wheels. It's quite subtle, it's only a few degrees, but it does make a noticeable difference when you're actually behind the wheel. For extra sportiness, you can go for the Torque Vectoring Plus system, where you've got a better distribution of torque for each corner of the car to help maintain better grip and carry more speed through corners. But this is, I think, the area where we start to see the point of diminishing returns, and you have to kind of control yourself a little bit with the spending. A huge option, which you may have seen on social media, is the active ride control. It's very clever. One of the highlight features is that when you just approach the vehicle, open the door to make getting in easier, it immediately jumps up by about 5.5 centimeters. And this being a hydraulic system, unlike air suspension, it's completely quiet and pretty much instant. It doesn't need about 10-15 seconds to fully raise up. Likewise, the moment you shut the door, it can drop down. During driving, to help with the driving dynamics, it can really make sure that the car stays perfectly flat in corners. With EVs, this is not something to worry about too much, because even though it's a heavy car, all of the weight is quite low down in the battery pack, so the center of gravity is low. The car is stable as is anyways, but this really pushes it one notch further if you want the best blend of driving dynamics without any compromise on comfort, because of how reactive the suspension can be. If we add it into the selection now, one of the prerequisites for it is the torque vectoring, so at that point you're spending £7,500, so I'm afraid we will go without it. Next up, we move on to the Sport Chrono package, and there are different variants of it. What it brings you by default is a slightly upgraded steering wheel, with steering wheel heating already bundled in. That's not a standard feature on the Taycan. A stopwatch on the top of the dash, a Sport Plus mode in addition to just Sport mode, and a few other little things. In the past, people used to go for this option specifically for having a toggle switch on the steering wheel. It's like a rotary dial, which is used to very easily flick between different driving modes, from range all the way to Comfort, Sport and Sport Plus. However, now with the Taycan, even though you see that the Sport Chrono package is not selected, that's already bundled in as standard. So realistically, the only feature you will get is that stopwatch on the dashboard. If you want to go a bit more fancy, you can obviously upgrade that even further. For about £100 more, you can also go for one with the push to pass feature, which is only available with the big battery pack. And what it does is that it allows an additional boost of about 60 kilowatts or 82 horsepower for 10 seconds. And if you look very closely, you will see that now on top of the dial there is a button. This is very much kind of carried over from Formula 1, where you can have a short burst of power, you press it down and you get the maximum performance of the vehicle. As far as I know, there's actually no limit on how many times you can use that button, and there's no kind of cooldown period. So this really is just a little bit of an extra gimmick to make the driver a bit more engaged if you want to push the car to the limit on some twisty roads, or perhaps on the track, even though I don't think many Taycan owners are going to be taking their cars on the track. I personally could do completely away with it, but it is a prerequisite for other feature, which I will show you in just a second. Moving on to the brakes, these lower end Taycans get normal disc brakes as standard with red brake calipers. If you want to go a step up, you can go for the so-called Porsche surface coated brakes, which is a very interesting choice, particularly in an electric car, because what you will realize is that with EVs, most of the slowing down is done using the electric motor and regenerative braking. So basically, the brake discs get very little use and they can get quite rusty very quickly. One way of avoiding this is sticking this £2,300 option, at which point you get discs which have almost like a ceramic coating on them, which helps prolong the lifespan of them and avoid the building up of rust, without the usual compromises of going all out with the Porsche ceramic composite brakes, because ceramic brakes are definitely more track oriented, which can really withstand repeated full hard braking sessions without a fade in performance, but they can be a little bit squeaky and annoying to use in everyday scenarios, and as you can see from that price point, very expensive to replace. If you don't really care for the braking technology, you just want to get rid of those red brake calipers, there's an option to go for black ones on the standard setup for £639. In my eyes, a complete rip-off, because you're just basically replacing red paint with black paint, but this is how Porsche makes their money. However, I would personally go for the Porsche Electric Sport Sound at only £389. It does require one of the upgraded sound systems. We will discuss those in just a second because you've got two options, but I would definitely recommend at least the Bose one, because the standard sound system, for it being a £100,000 car, is not that impressive, and even the Bose is just about acceptable, so definitely something to tick anyways. And the Sport Sound, at first I thought it would be such a gimmick, but it's very well done. You can turn it on and off depending on what you prefer, and instead of trying to mimic a V8 or a fake engine sound, it almost sounds like it amplifies the natural drivetrain noises and tunes of that electric motor and inverter combination. So it really suits the character of the Taycan, and it sounds almost like a UFO. And that's not just on the inside, you also get a speaker on the outside, and it almost makes like a fake idling sound even when you are set stationary. I quite like it, makes the car a bit more sporty, gives it a bit more character, which a Porsche is all about. Back in the day, I don't know how it works now, it used to be retrofittable, obviously because it requires additional hardware in the form of that speaker on the exterior. You would need to go to a Porsche dealer to get it done, but if it's a must-have feature for you, it's one of those options which should be possible to retrofit later on. What unfortunately still is the case is that you get a transmission as standard, and this is a very weird wording from Porsche, but basically what it means is that on the rear axle, the rear electric motor powers the rear wheels through a 2-speed gearbox. Most of the time the car will cruise in second gear for efficiency, but if you go into launch control mode or into sport mode, it will downshift into first gear to give you more torque off the line at low speeds. It's a shame because there is no way to kind of control the shifting yourself, and it can be a little bit jarring, and one of the beauties of electric cars should be linear torque and no interruptions from a gearbox, but this being built on the slightly older architecture compared to the Macan, it does have the 2-speed gearbox, so just take it for what it's worth. The front motor always direct drive just through a single-speed gearbox. Where I would spend my money again is the lights and vision department. As standard, you do already get full LED lights like you would expect on a modern car in 2024, but you can go a step further with lights which feature HD matrix technology. To give you a bit of a background, matrix technology basically means that each light is made up of multiple segments which can be controlled individually. And the car also uses the front-facing camera in the windscreen to detect any oncoming or preceding vehicles, and can use the lights very intelligently to just block out sections of the high beam, so you can basically be driving with high beam on all the time without dazzling other drivers. It works quite well on these Porsche products. Even the base lights are quite clever with how they can adjust the shape of the beam, but with the HD matrix lights, the matrix functionality is really pushed even further. The high definition part means that these are not even normal lights anymore. These are basically black and white projectors with 32,000 segments in total, which can be individually dimmed for the perfect illumination of the road, and they can also draw some patterns, etc. In my eyes, it really is one of the features which has made driving at night easier, more comfortable and safer. And to be fair, at only £1,800 for such an advanced package, it's quite reasonably priced. So yes, I want that in my car, please. Depending on when this video goes out, I may or may not have already done a video on matrix lights on this channel, so feel free to check it out in the top right hand corner in the card once that's live. if you care about the looks, you can also get them in tinted form right from the factory for a little bit extra. The full width light bar in the back is standard, but you can also customize the look of the there. The important option is the panoramic sunroof. I would say on a car of this class, a pan roof is definitely expected. It's a £1,300 option, so considering this is a single massive piece of glass stretching from the windscreen all the way to the back above the rear passengers' heads, I think that's reasonably priced. And the fact that it stretches over rear passengers' heads is quite important, because that sloping roofline of the Taycan, it looks fantastic, it makes the car look sporty, but it really does impact headroom, and combined with the quite small windows in the back, it can feel a little bit claustrophobic. Whereas having the additional light from the roof definitely helps to open up the cabin for passengers in the back, especially if you have kids. You can also go one step further to the roof with the variable light control. In that case, you've got the ability to individually dim or kind of frost up sections of the roof, but this is the point at which the price really goes through the roof, pardon the pun, at almost £4,000. And obviously any kind of repair will be a lot more expensive as well if it gets chipped or anything like that. So the standard roof will definitely do. They already have quite good coatings in them, so in the summer it doesn't get too hot in the vehicle despite there not being a manual sunshade. Speaking of protection from the glass, you can go for privacy glass in the back. This is personal choice, obviously. It's not something you can undo once you select it, because from the factory it gets actually installed into the glass instead of it being an aftermarket film on the glass. But I think most people would expect it on a £100,000 Porsche. So I would select that. Regarding the glass, you also have the option of thermally and noise insulated glass. This is basically double pane glass. People hate when I say double glazed because yes, technically speaking, there is no air gap in between, but it's two pieces of glass sandwiched together with like a gel in between, which helps reduce noise and should be also a little bit better at maintaining cabin temperature inside if you have the AC running. Couple of words of warning with this. Number one, the Taycan features frameless doors. So most of the noise you will get is not actually through the glass itself, but it's the seams which the glass forms with the rest of the vehicle. So it will not probably make that much of a difference. Secondly, you also get a noise kind of laminated windscreen with this option, which can prevent some of the toll road tags working because it cannot get the signal through the actual windscreen. And lastly, if you get a parking dent in a supermarket car park, which the Taycan can be quite prone to because it is a big vehicle, it is practically impossible to remove them using the standard PDR methods, because the guys normally use kind of thin tools which slide in between the window glass behind the door skin, but with the double pane glass there's not enough clearance to get said tools in. So I would personally omit it, but if you want to go all out, you can also obviously go for the combination of privacy glass with the noise and thermal insulation built in as well. Lastly, with the transport and protection, this is mostly just add-ons, so you can go for roof racks, the roof box, different bags and so on, but this obviously can be all optioned out post-purchase as well, so it's not something to worry about at this point. You can also fully kind of kit out your garage with Porsche merch. Enough of that, let's move on to the interior now, because there's also a few interesting options here. Obviously, you can spend all the customizing how exactly you want it to look with the stitching, etc. you want in custom colors, but obviously this being quite a rare kind of a la carte option, it's not something which is very easy to do for the factory, so you pay a lot for it. And it being such a tiny thing, skip it, don't worry about it. What you can go for are the carbon matte inlays, because if we enlarge the interior view, normally you just get these kind of matte black plastic trims on the door cards, but if you want the interior to look a little bit more premium, you can go, for example, for the matte carbon. It's quite nice that Porsche has decided to go with these matte finishes, because gloss carbon and gloss piano black, as fantastic as it can look in the brochure, it's practically next to impossible to keep that glossy finish looking pristine. The moment you breathe in the car, you will get some dust on, and the moment you want to wipe it off, you will get some scratches on there. So this is nice, but to be fair, I don't mind the standard option either. If you are all about your leather, you can also option additional bits, but again, this just makes it less practical. What you may want to consider are the accent packages. You have got an option in black and neodyme. Basically, as standard, if we zoom in on the interior, the air vents and some of the steering wheel trims have this kind of matte silver or grey finish. I personally quite like it. It works well with the black interior for a little bit of color contrast, but if you want to break it up a little bit or make it more exciting, you can go for the neodyme, which is this rose gold color. I know it can look a little bit tacky in the configurator, but we actually had one Taycan at Weissach with it fitted, and it looks really smart in person, especially if you are going, for example, for an all black car. It just adds that little bit of punch to break up the all black look. You can also get a very similar finish for the wheels on the exterior if you want to tie in the inside and the outside. Otherwise, if you want to go full on stealth, you've got the option of black. But this goes against my philosophy of paying extra for color, because obviously even the silver is painted. So I'm going to save myself £422. Again, you've got different kind of stitching options. You can get the Porsche logo embossed on the front seat, the rear seat, the middle console, the armrest, etc. Look, if you really want it, it's not that expensive in the grand scheme of things. I just think it looks a little bit tacky and it looks like you're trying too hard. So I'm happy to skip all of that. However, if you want a little bit of a punch of color in the interior, you can go for seat belts in different colors. And for example, you can go for something quite classy like the Blackberry look, and you will make the car feel a little bit special. And to be fair, for £380, that's actually one of the more reasonable visual options. The important thing is the steering wheel. And this is where it can get a little bit confusing, because at the first glance, it looks like there is a lot of options to choose from. So recap, as standard, the Taycan has a leather steering wheel with the driving mode dial, but that's it. No heating and no push to pass feature. If you just want to get the steering wheel heating, it's a separate option at £209. You get the same steering wheel design, it is just heated now. I would say that's definitely worth it in an electric car, but if you want, for example, carbon inlays, you go for a different option here. That automatically bundles in the Sport Chrono package and removes the steering wheel heating, because that's already bundled into this upgraded steering wheel option. If you look closely, you will see that the steering wheel has a slightly changed aesthetic with the kind of middle marker at the top as well. The finish of the steering wheel also matters, so that's one of the reasons why there are so many choices here. You've got different combinations of whether you want the carbon or the standard trim, and whether you want the Racetex finish or just the leather finish. The Racetex brings you the kind of fluffy Alcantara style finish, which, yes, it looks lovely, it is very comfortable, but unless you are wearing gloves, it will deteriorate very quickly, and it's very difficult to clean and maintain. And once it's gone, it's very difficult to get the fibers of the Alcantara to stand up again and retain that fluffy texture. So take it from me as a vegan who would love to advise not to use leather, go for the leather option. It just ages a lot better. You can also choose from additional accessories, even more stuff covered in Alcantara, like for example the roof lining, which I think is a little bit of a rip-off at £1,800, because that's a reasonable price if you didn't have the sunroof and you have a large area to cover, but with the glass roof you're not covering much, but it still costs a lot. So I'm definitely skipping all of that. Aluminium pedals at £260, it's just a little thing, but yes, it will look better, so that is fair. You can go really crazy with these customization options, but the price will skyrocket rather quickly. And maybe it's just because I'm not much of a looks guy, I don't see the value in them. What I would spend my money on is the technology, because at the end of the day, it's a modern electric car. Firstly, you can go for the heads-up display. £1,200, not too unreasonably priced. However, the moment you tick this, you need to go for the upgraded windscreen with the grey top tint stripe. Not too big of a deal, but counterintuitively, I also think the heads-up display detracts from some of the design of the dashboard, because you will see, if you look closely, you now get this cover over the instrument display, which, if you look closely on the Taycan, is very slim. It looks super sleek, whereas when it's covered, it really makes the dash look quite bulbous. So I would actually save the money. The instrument display itself is fantastic. It's very clear. You can have the full map in there, or you can customize it to show whatever you find the most important. So you can definitely get away without the heads-up display. Likewise, the night vision assist is a nice feature where you get the thermal camera which can project the image into one of the displays, but realistically you will not be driving around by looking at the screen, you will still be looking out through the windscreen. So the only real positive I find in this system is that you get the light marker function, and that's the reason why it requires the HD Matrix LED headlights. So when the thermal camera detects an animal or a pedestrian on the side of the road, it will be highlighted by the actual matrix beam of the headlights, so you can be very aware of your surroundings. But at almost £2,000, it is one of the options which I wouldn't bother with. What is important is the surround view with the active parking support. This basically brings the 360-degree camera, which gives you a 3D view of the surroundings and also the automated parking. Now, if you remember from my Macan configurator video, for that car I mentioned it's a bit pointless, and that the quality of these Porsche cameras, despite it being a premium brand, are quite rubbish. Now, I haven't driven the Facelift Taycan, but I still stand by those things. However, in the Taycan, I would option it in, even though it's quite a pricey option at £1,000. The reason being, on the Macan, the charging port is in the back, so you'll be reversing into most charging stations. On the Taycan, the charging port is within the front wing and it's quite far back. And with quite a few charging stations having relatively short leads, you'd really need to pull up right all the way to the curb or the bollards to make sure that the cable reaches. So the front camera comes in very handy. So I am picking this option. If you want to go a step further, you can get the remote park assist, where you can kind of summon the vehicle in and out of the space using your phone. I've had experience with this feature on Teslas and on Hyundai/Kia products, where it is kind of bundled in, but I definitely wouldn't pay £1,500 for it as an extra, because it is realistically one of those gimmicks which you will show to your friends and then rarely use it in practice. What I definitely want in my luxurious long-distance GT cruiser car is adaptive cruise control. And in fact, mini rant, it's absolutely ridiculous that the Taycan doesn't come with adaptive cruise control as standard, because my ID3, which I drive at the moment, which you can get on the used market for under £20,000, it's about £40,000, brand new, comes with adaptive cruise as standard, and is obviously part of the same VW group. So shame on you, Porsche, for scamming customers, but yes, I want my adaptive cruise control at the very least, and at £1,000 is actually very reasonably priced, but this I would say is a must-have for most Porsches. Maybe I'm just too much of a adaptive cruise fanboy, but I want it. One step above the adaptive cruise is the InnoDrive system. So if you're not aware of how adaptive cruise control works, it basically slows down for the vehicle ahead of you. So with the cruise control, instead of setting a fixed speed, you set the maximum speed you will allow the vehicle to go. So for example, on the motorway you can set it to 70 miles per hour. And if there is slower traffic ahead of you, the car will automatically slow down to keep a safe gap. And you can adjust how big that gap should be. InnoDrive brings automatic regulation to that maximum target speed. So for example, if the vehicle detects road signs showing that there is a construction zone, or the speed limit simply changes, it will adjust the speed automatically. Similarly, if you're approaching an intersection and you need to turn, or you are going to a roundabout, the speed will be automatically reduced to make sure that you can follow the road at a comfortable speed. This is still not full self-driving. You need to be aware it doesn't really kind of yield to cars, it just reduces the speed low enough to make sure that if you need to yield, you can very simply press the brake pedal and comfortably come to a stop. Whereas if you need to continue, the car will continue through the intersection on its own if you don't intervene. So that's the InnoDrive side of things. The active lane keeping is, if you're coming from a Tesla, the equivalent of auto steer, which means lane centering. As standard, all of these Taycans have lane keeping assistant, which means that if you get distracted and you cross over the lane line, the car will try to kind of nudge you back into the lane, but it kind of ping-pongs from side to side. Whereas with the active lane keeping, it will try to steer on its own when you have the adaptive cruise control running to maintain the actual center of the lane. It's a very nice feature, especially if you do a lot of motorway miles, so I want it. However, if you are buying one on the used market, for example, or you are really tight on budget and it's something you want to maybe experiment with later on, good news is that you can unlock the InnoDrive and the lane keeping features separately through the Porsche online store. So once you get the car and you sign into your Porsche app on your phone, you can then just go into the app and get those features unlocked post-purchase, and it's all software, so you don't really need to take it to the Porsche garage whatsoever. However, with me wanting both of them, this is what I would put into my car. The important one being that the prerequisite for this is the Sport Chrono package with the push-to-pass functionality. So I will accept those changes. Basically, we're removing the individual adaptive cruise and the steering wheel heating because the steering wheel heating is included with the Sport Chrono package. So yes, that indeed did bump up the price a little bit. I'm honestly not a huge fan of the clock on the dashboard. I know it really is a traditional Porsche thing. So if you really hate it like I do, but you do want the additional driver assistance features, you could go for the adaptive cruise control without the Sport Chrono package, get the car and then unlock the InnoDrive and the active lane centering post-purchase. And I suppose that's the only workaround there. The last driving assistance feature you can option is the lane change assist, which is basically blind spot monitoring, where you get a little indicator in the wing mirror in case you have a vehicle next to you to help you with changing lanes, to make sure that you don't accidentally change into someone's car. Look, the visibility out of the Taycan is not the best, so if you want to have it, feel free to do so, but I've never really had any problems with this. Especially if you're an attentive driver, you will be just fine. Moving on to comfort and usability, let's start with comfort access, which means that the moment you approach the vehicle, it automatically pops the door handles out, unlocks, you can just jump in, as long as you have the key on you, for example, in your pocket or in your purse. I think it's a fantastic convenience feature, but as it says in this note here, important disclaimer is that this is how cars get stolen today, especially if you live in a detached house with your own driveway, because the thieves use so-called relay attacks where they almost trick the car into thinking that the key is next to it by amplifying the signal of the key, which is in your house, using specialized aerials and equipment. So I do understand why people can be quite wary of it, but it's such a fantastic convenience feature that I personally would just put up with it and have a dedicated metal box which you can put the keys into when you get home, because that way the signals of those keys will not propagate past that box, so this whole relay attack thing becomes a non-issue. But when you're out and about and you have your hands full of shopping, for example, you can simply approach the car and it will unlock without you having to take the key fob out and press the buttons manually. If you want super luxurious feel in your Taycan, you can go for the soft close doors, which means that if you just lightly close the door, the last bit of the latching mechanism can be closed by the vehicle itself, so you don't have to slam the doors shut. To be fair, at £546, it's not an expensive option, but that's one of the features which I can do without. Likewise, you've got options for the air conditioning. As standard, you've got 2-zone climate control with some air vents in the back as well. But if you want your rear passengers to have their own zones, you can go for the 4-zone climate, or you can also go for the air quality system, which is basically an ionizer which helps clean the air inside of the vehicle. A quite handy option can be the HomeLink garage door opener. If you have a compatible garage, you basically get dedicated buttons in the rear view mirror which you can press as you approach your garage and it will open. So it's a lovely feature if you have a house with your own garage, but if you live and you have a communal underground car park, for example, you most likely get an RFID key fob, and this is not a compatible system with that. It cannot kind of tap the key fob for you to get into your secure car park. So just something to consider depending on your parking arrangements. The driver memory package in this case is included because we upgraded the seats. You can also get a smoker package, etc. But this is where we really get into the nitty-gritty details. I would say at £0, the preparation for the Porsche dashcam front and rear is definitely an option worth picking. I don't know why it doesn't come standard from the factory, but basically it prepares the wiring harnesses for the front and the back. So from the outside it doesn't really change anything, but if at any point you want to opt for those official Porsche dashcams, they will be very neatly wired in. So there's no harm in picking that. But to go on a mini rant again, what I do find infuriating is the situation with the side airbags. So if you want additional airbags in the rear, you need to pay extra. I think this is where Porsche is taking the mick a little bit, because as a premium manufacturer, especially safety should not be something you pay extra for. And in my Macan video, where this is the same case, I was told that it's because of the compatibility with child seats, that the airbags would interfere with them. Well, I'm sorry, so if I pick this option I cannot have child seats in the back? It just doesn't make sense. I'm sorry, Porsche, this should be included as standard. And obviously there should be a way to disable this in the infotainment system. Speaking of the infotainment, if you like your gadgets, you can go for the passenger side display, which integrates an additional display which basically mirrors the same format as the middle display right in front of the passenger in the kind of fascia of the dashboard. At £1,000 you really need to value your front passengers, so you can definitely do without it, and most people these days are just going to be on their phone anyways. The sound system, I mentioned that the Bose is the minimum I would go for. If you have the budget for it, the Burmester will sound fantastic, but it's a very expensive option at £4,500. So if you are hugely into your music, it's definitely worth it. You will not be disappointed, but yeah, you are definitely paying for it. Lastly, in the infotainment subsection, you can also go for the rear seat entertainment, or just the preparation for these rear seat screens. This used to be a big thing obviously back in the day, but now with kids you can just hand them an iPad. It's going to be a lot cheaper. It's much easier to upgrade post-purchase, so not something to bother with in my eyes. This being an EV, you can choose your charging accessories, and you can either go for the Porsche wall box. At the first glance it may seem like it's quite expensive at £1,300. There are many cheaper options on the market, but just look how stunning it looks. It's a Porsche product at the end of the day. And being built with kind of mainland Europe in mind, it supports up to 22 kilowatts of AC power. So if you're lucky enough in the UK to get 3-phase power supply into your house, you could really charge your Taycan quickly. And keep in mind, this wall box will be compatible with other vehicles which have the Type 2 connector, which is now the standardized connector across all EVs in Europe. So it's not necessarily bad value for money. You also can opt for the mobile charger, which is basically a 3-pin domestic charger. And while it is very clever with changeable ends, which means that you can also, for example, plug into the industrial blue commando sockets, which you find at many campsites or industrial sites, which can provide up to 7.2 kilowatts of charging power. It's an absolutely massive charger which comes in a massive bag. It will take up a lot of space. It just about fits in the frunk, so yeah, no need to worry about this. And realistically, you will not be using the 3-pin socket to charge the Taycan much, because it's such a big battery. With this Performance Battery Plus, it's about 97 kilowatt hours of usable energy. It would take days to fully charge using a 3-pin socket. So just get a home charger, whether it be the Porsche wallbox or a different brand of a charger installed at your house, and that's the best solution. There's not much to mention in the accessories section. It's all pretty self-explanatory. So if we go into the summary, you will see that we arrived at a grand total price of £117,109. Quite punchy, but I tried to restrain myself with quote-unquote only £21,000 of optional extras. I know some people buy a full car for that, but this is the world of Porsche where options are expensive and they really make the overall experience, so you definitely have to budget for at least some of them. To recap, I went for the optional paint, the optional wheels, but I went for the sensible options, not trying to go over the top. Kept the standard interior trims, but upgraded the front seats and also the rear seats with the additional 4+1 configuration. On the exterior, I went for the gloss black trims to complement the design of the vehicle, but important is the drivetrain, where the big battery is a must-have in my opinion on a vehicle of this class. The rear axle steering is nice. The Sport Chrono package is a prerequisite for the InnoDrive system. The electric sport sound is not too expensive and really adds to the character of the vehicle. And as I mentioned, I like driving at night, so those upgraded lights are a nice feature. The panoramic roof is definitely expected on a vehicle of this class, and so is privacy glass. Nothing too crazy on the other interior options, but technology is where I think you should spend at least some of the money. The surround view camera is helpful. The InnoDrive, or at least the adaptive cruise, is a must-have. I like the comfort access. I do expect the best possible safety in a 100 grand vehicle, and I would want a decent sound system at the very least. So I would like to think that I didn't go overly crazy, and this is something which you basically have to budget for if you want a nicely specified Porsche Taycan. £120,000, give or take, depending on what you want. But I hear you, you may be saying, this is too much, you don't need some of these gadgets. So let's try to look at an alternative configuration. I will put all of these ones which I've done so far into the video description, because with Porsche you can get a link and you can see what I've configured. But here I have an alternative one which is a little bit more sensible. I went for the slightly different wheels, still very similar look as you can see from the exterior, but I've only come up to, well, only £97,000. Upgraded color still, upgraded wheels, same interior with the 5-seat configuration, but I didn't go for the sport seats. Big battery. Realistically, this is where you can save additional £4,500, but as I kept saying throughout this video, I think it is expected on a car of this class, like the panoramic roof and the Bose sound system. You may be thinking, wait a second, back in the day there was a lot of stuff which was not standard on the Porsche, which you would expect to be standard, but you haven't seen it ticked anywhere here. Well, good news, Porsche finally listened and the standard equipment has been significantly improved for this facelift version. And I made some notes about what's standard now. This used to differ between the different trim levels in the past and model years, but basically all Taycans now have ambient lighting, the reversing camera, electrically folding exterior mirrors, because believe it or not, this used to be a £200 extra even on some of the most expensive Taycans, heated front seat standard, the Porsche Intelligent Range Manager. Again, ridiculous that you had to pay extra for this, but this is basically software in the built-in navigation system that if you put a destination in, the car will calculate how much energy in percentage you will have when you reach your destination, and if you will not have enough, it will automatically plan your charging stops for you and will preheat the battery for the best rapid charging performance while you are en route. So that's great that that's all included. That should have always been there, because especially the Taycan being the first Porsche electric model, it really helps out if you are new to the whole world of EVs. Heat pump is also standard, which helps reduce the energy consumption when heating the cabin in the winter. Your winter range is still lower than your summer range, but it helps reduce the gap between the summer and winter energy consumption. You also get smartphone wireless charging as standard. It is somewhat impractical because it is included in the central console, which doesn't get much airflow in there. So at least with my experience, my phone used to overheat in there a lot, but at least it is standard now. The charging ports are no longer manual, the electric sliding ones, which look very elegant as they slide into the wing of the vehicle, that's standard, and they are available on both sides. So if you charge using the Type 2 AC slow charging, you can plug in from either side, but the rapid charging is only on one side. And to finish the list of standard equipment, there's the driving mode switch, which I mentioned, the little dial on the steering wheel, Power Steering Plus, which adjusts the weight and the support of the power steering depending on the speeds you are doing, and crucially the adaptive air suspension, which means adaptive dampers and adjustable ride height with fantastic comfort, is included across all trim levels. Fantastic, and it really makes the experience that much nicer. But either way you cut it, you will basically have to spend at least £90,000 on a Taycan to make it worthwhile. What I would say is that it's going to be very tempting to just go for it for the looks and the brand, not spec any options other than the big wheels, but you will seriously miss out on the full premium experience by not going for the glass roof, the upgraded sound system and the additional battery range. However, having said all of this and having configured the 4S as my sensible configuration, I'm afraid, even though it looks great with a teardrop swept-back shape, it's not the car I would actually buy. People like crossover SUVs, and the Taycan, it just doesn't fit the bill. The saloon market really is shrinking. And if you look at the Cross Turismo, there is a version which is called the 4. So it doesn't quite have the performance of the 4S, but it's the same powertrain just detuned to slot one step lower in the lineup. It's only available on the Cross Turismo, but it's realistically the version of the Taycan which most people should get. It's much more practical in terms of luggage space, having that hatchback shape, and also having the additional ground clearance really helps when you're driving daily around town, because the Taycan, it really is kind of a proper sports car in a sense that if you go over a bigger speed bump, it may sometimes bottom out, and going over curbs is very much a no-no, whereas with the Cross Turismo, even without adjusting the air suspension, it just glides over imperfections without any trouble. And with this 4 trim level, having configured it as closely as possible to that 4S recommended configuration I did a while ago, it actually comes out cheaper, and you only lose out a little bit of performance compared to the 4S. So considering you get the more practical body shape, this is probably the version I would go for. The 4 used to be quite slow back in the day, but with the facelift, the power across the lineup has been upped for every drivetrain level, so a 0 to 60 time of under 5 seconds is definitely respectable even by Porsche standards. If you want to throw caution to the wind and you want to go all out on the other end of the spectrum, you can go for the GT. This is only available in the Sport Saloon shape, and if you want to go fully out, you can go for the one with the Weissach package, which has set a lot of records. I think it was recently on the Nürburgring. What's important to mention is that even with the Weissach package, it's the same price as the one without the Weissach package. The Weissach pack, most importantly from a visual perspective, gives you the rear wing, but to keep the weight down, Porsche stripped out the rear seats. So look, it can be very tempting to go for the one with the Weissach pack if you want the bragging rights about the fastest Taycan available, but it really is just that. I think it was done purely to create headlines as, yes, it's a configuration which you can buy, so theoretically it is a mass-produced car, but nobody will actually get it. If you really have the budget for the fastest Taycan, or you want to save a lot of tax, go for the Turbo GT without the Weissach pack. You get all the performance, you get most of the looks, but you actually get seats in the back, so if you have any friends or family, you can actually bring them along with you. Either way, I didn't have time to tick all the options because there are simply so many, but I still made it up to £193,000. So it's fair to say that if you go all out, these Taycans, you will touch £200,000 without trying too hard. Yes, it is quite a lot of money. So what are the alternatives? Well, right within the Porsche lineup, as mentioned multiple times during this video, the Macan. And to be fair, as much as I love the Taycan, the Macan is the more sensible choice for the vast majority of customers in the UK. It's just a more practical shape and it's a lot lower priced. Since I made a Macan configurator video, a new trim has been introduced with a single motor version which just powers the rear wheels, but the same big battery pack. So the range will be very similar to the Taycan with the big battery pack, but the base level Macan now starts at £67,200, so almost a third cheaper compared to an equivalent Taycan, and as I said, it's a more practical package overall, so that's what I would advise for most people. If you really want a Taycan but you are on a strict budget, definitely look on the used market. They have depreciated quite significantly. It was quite a complex situation why the Taycan was hit particularly hard. I made a long video about it, so make sure to check that out in the top right hand corner of the screen if you want to learn more about what caused the depreciation and, most importantly, how you can benefit from the situation and not get completely stung. But even with the improved efficiency and range of this facelift model, don't forget that the pre-facelift is very similar to the current Taycan. And with the used prices being so low, you save yourself quite a lot of money. Just make sure to go for one with the big battery pack, and I would also recommend good Porsche extended warranty. If you want to look outside of the Porsche world because you want something either less snobby or you're not allowed to have a Porsche as your company car, which I know quite a few people being in that situation, or you want something which is possibly a bit cheaper to insure, but you still want the Taycan technology, you can go for the Audi e-tron GT. I believe the facelift, which basically carries over the same features from the Taycan facelift, is now called the e-tron GTS. It ironically starts at more money, £108,680, but that's because by default you get the big battery already included and also the dual motor drivetrain, on top of some additional features as well, like the adaptive cruise control, etc. So it's just a matter of picking one which suits your needs or your personal tastes better. Also, what has been pitched as the latest Taycan killer is the Lotus Emeya, but this very much is only on paper because they're quite different cars. The Taycan, I've been referring to it as a four-door sports car throughout this video, and I know many people can get quite upset about it because yes, it's an electric vehicle, but it truly feels like a sports car. You sit quite low to the ground and very cocooned in the cabin. For being quite a large and wide car on the outside, it is quite tight on the inside. The Emeya is much more of a Porsche Panamera or Tesla Model S competitor, where it is a little bit more bloated, but you get a lot more cabin space, especially in the second row. However, you get very similar performance to the Taycan and also an 800-volt battery architecture with the same amazing charging speeds, allowing 80% charge in under 20 minutes at the fastest rapid chargers. Another upcoming Taycan killer, which is not out yet but may be worth considering if you want something on a lower budget and you don't want to stick out from the crowd too much because of the brand, is the Polestar 5, which we know will follow a similar body shape and should be unveiled probably in 2025. So I think that's it. The video is probably very long as it is. To conclude, I really quite like the Taycan, and to be fair, the facelift really made it what it should have been from the start, but it doesn't change the situation that the Macan is the much better pick, especially when you consider overall package and the price point within the Porsche lineup. But if you know what you're doing, you're aware of the risks regarding the Taycan depreciation, and you're going to spec it nicely, I am confident you will not regret it. So that's where I'm going to leave it. At the end of the day, the choice is up to you. Let me know in the comments what options are must-haves for you in a high-end vehicle like the Taycan. Thank you very much for watching. If you want to see more EV content, make sure to subscribe to the channel. I'm afraid I'm too broke for a Taycan as of now, so you will have to do with ID3s and lower-end EVs, but that's probably what most people in the UK are buying anyways. Thanks again, and see you in the next one.